whose data may have been compromised.
I mean, it seems blindingly obvious, but we need to search for the evidence. But if you've gathered this tremendous data set because you've had access to not only respondees but their friends and their likes through Facebook, and you've developed this for the US, then if this trick works, then you want to replicate it for other markets that you were pitching for work in, would you not?
That was the idea, although in Europe it's quite difficult due to the data protection laws.
If you observe them.
Correct.
Okay. Could you describe what knowledge you had about aggregate IQ and how it operated within the SCL umbrella?
Of course. So it was my understanding when I joined the company that Aggregate IQ was our exclusive digital and data engineering partner. So they would build our software, such as a platform that we designed for Senator Ted Cruz's campaign that was meant to collect data for canvassing individuals that would go door to door, collecting data and hygiening data of individuals in those households. And we also had no internal digital capacity at the time, so we didn't actually undertake any of our digital campaigns. That was done exclusively through Aggregate IQ. Now, through the roller coaster of Senator Cruz's campaign and engagements with the consultants that were working on it, I believed that our relationship with Aggregate IQ became strained. They did not turn in work to us on time. Our clients are not always happy with their performance, and so therefore we stopped working with them. Subsequently have heard in the press and from other individuals that some of our board members might have had ownership of Aggregate IQ, which I was not aware of at all.
So this is quite important. When did you think or consider that the group had stopped working with Aggregate IQ?
Probably late 2015 was when issues became quite strained, when the campaign ramped up and we were near the end of the Republican primaries.
Yeah, we've had a series of documents and testimonies from Mr. Wiley that alleges that Aggregate IQ, as part of the SCL-CA umbrella, did extensive vote work for Vote Leave and was paid a large sum of money for that.
I have seen that, and his testimony could be exactly correct. I had no knowledge of that type of relationship with AIQ, and I actually never have met Chris Wiley. He was no longer with the company when I joined, and I believe that he was a consultant, sometimes referred to as SCL Canada, that was based in Canada, working full-time for Aggregate IQ as a partner.
Could I ask you, before and during the referendum campaign here, what was your state of awareness of any work that was being done by the group, including Aggregate IQ, for Vote Leave?
My only interaction with Vote Leave was that I was supposed to have a meeting with Matthew Elliott 2 days after my first meeting with Aaron Banks, and that meeting was canceled after he found out that we had a meeting with executives from Leave EU. So I never met anybody from Vote Leave, and I didn't know that AIQ, whom I didn't think we were working with at the time anyway, nor did I think we had joint investors or owners of our companies. I wasn't aware that they were pitching for that work or undertaking any of that work.
So while you were there, and you were there until early this year, you're not aware of any talk, chatter, boasts within the company at the time, SCL, Cambridge Analytica, that they were doing extensive work with Aggregate IQ within their umbrella for Vote Leave.
Yeah, I wish that I was, but I mean, it sounds like we probably were working very closely, but I was not involved in U.S. politics at that point.
UK?
Well,
there was a UK referendum. The United States wasn't leaving Europe.
of course, but Cambridge Analytica and the joint ownership of Aggregate IQ was based out of our U.S. companies and affiliates.
Right. So,
Brittany, one of your associates just handed you a piece of paper. I'm happy to give you a moment to look at it before you, Mr. Fowler, resumes his questions. That would be helpful.
Yeah, well, of course I can't speak for SCL Canada and their relationship with Aggregate IQ or
so
documents that I'm not privy to.
What were you doing in the group then at the time of the referendum in the UK? You were pitching elsewhere, were you?
Yes, so I was between Washington, D.C. and London. I was undertaking a series of pitches for Leave EU, for the UK Independence Party, and for Eldon and Go Skippy Insurance.
But you were left out of any work with Vote Leave. That seems odd.
Well, Vote Leave was technically the competition to Leave EU. Upon engaging with Leave EU, I was not supposed to be meeting with Vote Leave because we were in competition with them for the designation from the Electoral Commission.
So there seems to be this sort of Chinese wall was operating within the company then.
It sounds like it was.
But you didn't know about it.
No, sir.
Okay.
I just wanted to just pick up on one thing that you mentioned there, which was the other surveys that Cambridge Analytica run on Facebook, the other personality surveys. We touched on this with Alexander Knicks last time round, and he said that those surveys where there was a Facebook login at the end to complete the survey didn't mean that your personal data was then being accessed by Cambridge Analytica. But what you're saying is that that was not the case, that actually the purpose of the survey was to gather this information, and that by completing it with your Facebook login as well, Cambridge Analytica would also get access to your data on Facebook too.
I believe that was the point of the quizzes in the first place, yes.
Yes, well, I think that does sound like the point of it, but it's essentially that's totally different to what Alexander Nix said to us. Ian, did you have a quick question on this particular point?
Yes. Did you know at the time that you were pitching to leave EU that Cambridge Analytica was also pitching to Vote Leave?
I knew that I had a meeting that was meant to take place after Leave EU so that I could also explore work with Vote Leave, but as I said, that meeting was canceled, and I didn't know that there were any further engagements with Vote Leave until Mr. Aaron Banks made it clear that he was not interested in paying us for any of the work that we had either already undertaken or had proposed to undertake. So I do believe that some of my executives re-engaged in talks with Vote Leave, but at the time I was no longer involved in that.
Did you know that Cambridge Analytica had an agreement with AIQ to transfer data?
We would have had that because that would have been essential to our work on Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. But I was under the impression that AIQ did not fulfill their contractual obligations to our clients, and therefore we were no longer working with them. I remember many angry phone calls back and forth between AIQ and our internal staff, and that tensions were very tight, and that we decided instead to hire our own data engineers and to hire our own internal digital team and build out internal capacity so that we no longer had to rely on them.
Can you confirm that Cambridge Analytica transferred data to AIQ?
What I can say is that the essential relationship between AIQ and Cambridge Analytica, or the SCL group, was that AIQ had built platforms that we used to collect data, so we would have had to transfer data between ourselves for us to access that, and that they also ran our digital campaigns for a while, not just for Senator Ted Cruz, but other clients, political and commercial and social. So we would have had to transfer data back to them for them to use those lists for digital targeting. So I believe by the essential nature of that relationship that would have been a requirement, yes.
And of course, once data is transferred to AIQ, they have the data from Cambridge Analytica. So they could have used Cambridge Analytica data to pursue their relationship with Vote Leave.
They could have done, but likely in contravention to the contracts that we originally signed with them, although I'm not privy to those contracts, so I can't be sure.
One point of clarification. But you mentioned Chris Wiley worked for SCL Canada.
I believe that was the name that was used for I don't know, him as an individual or the AIQ office. So that was considered SCL Canada. Our company tended to have a business model where we would partner with another company, and that company would represent us as, you know, SCL Germany or SCL USA, or, you know, that was kind of
So
the model.
as far as you're concerned, SCL Canada and AIQ are the same thing?
I believe so, yes.
And so do you believe then Chris Wiley was working for AIQ if he was also working for SCL Canada?
Yes, I believe that SCL Canada was just a glorified title, but he was full-time engaged with AIQ.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Simon Hart.
Thank you. Can we, sticking on the referendum theme just for a moment,
Of course.
dealing more specifically with Leave EU, once the pitch was successful, what was the actual level of work involved between Cambridge Analytica and Leave EU? What was the scope of the work?
Right, so when I first began engagement with Leave EU, we had parallel discussions going on what we could...
You pitched for the work yourself, did you?
Yes,
Yeah,
myself and our CFO, COO, Julian Wheatland, who's the current acting CEO, as well as senior data scientists, and usually a psychologist would be in the room as well, or one of our researchers. So we were undertaking parallel pitches for Leave EU, the UK Independence Party, and Eldon and Go Skippy Insurance. Those proposals at first were all preliminary. The one for Leave EU and the UK Independence Party included taking receipt of data and matching that data with research or survey data and modeling it so that we could find the different personality types of individuals that would be most likely to engage with the messaging. For Leave EU, that was specifically for individuals that would be interested in voting yes or voting to leave in the referendum. And for the UK Independence Party, it was obviously similar, as that's the nature of the party itself. Now, when we first started talking to Leave EU, they did not have much data to speak of because it was very much in the beginning of the campaign. So in parallel, we were in talks with the UK Independence Party, where we believed that their membership data would be quite indicative of individuals that were interested in the UK leaving the European Union. So it was decided that while Leave EU did not possess much data, that we could begin with an engagement for the UK Independence Party. And we did. We took receipt of their membership data and of survey data. It was a survey amongst their members of different reasons why people might be interested in the UK leaving the European Union, what those benefits or consequences might be. So that survey data was matched to the membership data and used to make a model. Out of that analysis, we found 5 different personality types, the types of people that...
How much data were we talking about? How many people? I don't know what the membership of UKIP was at the time, but...
I would like to follow up with documentation on that.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
believe... I never took receipt of the data, so I don't know what the final count was, but I probably have an email that states the number somewhere.
Okay.
So I can revert with that.
Yeah.
Now, this analysis was drawn up into briefing material. Those briefs were used in order to talk to the executives of the Leave EU campaign and other consultants about the insights that we had from the UK Independence Party data. And that was used to give insights for their social media messaging, their campaign messaging, events, canvassing, and so forth. Now, while we were undertaking this work, we were also being consulted to by Philip Koppel, QC, on how this data could be used and how it could be modeled. So
who was he working for? Who was paying him?
He was contracted by Cambridge Analytica
Okay. Right.
through Matthew Richardson, who was a barrister that I believe was secretary of the UK Independence Party at the time. And those documents, I believe I've turned into the committee as well, where we were given advice on what we could and couldn't do. Now, that was preliminary while we were planning on a national, working with national data sets and undertaking a much larger survey than the one that we were provided by the party itself. This piece of work was in the proposal and in the contract and invoice that we submitted to them, a chargeable piece of work, not very significant in terms of our other pricing structures, but £41,500, which is something that should have been paid for. Now, I do understand that in the press 2 days ago, it came to light that Aaron Banks did make a donation to the UK Independence Party a week before the referendum vote, which was meant to cover that piece of work. But the UK Independence Party decided not to pass on those funds to Cambridge Analytica and pay the invoice that we had
Just
submitted.
on the question of money, what was the total value, and this may be someone that written evidence, forgive me if it is, what was the total value of the contract between Cambridge Analytica and Leave EU?
We never had a contract with Leave EU. The contract was with the UK Independence Party for the analysis of this data, but it was meant to benefit
Okay, so
Leave EU.
who paid who, how much money, and when did they pay it?
So we submitted a contract for £41,500, and that was never paid
that
to
was
us.
the whole thing. That was for the company's entire involvement in this process.
That was meant to be phase one.
Okay.
I had two choices of next phases for engagements, which were to be either almost £500,000, it was £496,500, or if we were to license them further data, undertake further database engineering, and give them access to our software development platform, Connect, which was for data management and for canvassing purposes, it would have been £808,100.
Okay. And how much of that, if you can remember, and it may be a slightly unfair question, how much of that came in during the reporting period, i.e. the period they would have been legally required to declare that?
So none of what was proposed in this document was actually undertaken. It was only phase one
Right.
of my first preliminary proposal that was undertaken, and that was a total of £41,500.
So there was, I suppose, I'm trying to sort of put words in your mouth slightly, which is, as far as you're aware, there was all of the necessary declarations were made by. I thought it was going to be just Leave EU, but you're suggesting it could be the relationship came more directly with UKIP. As far as you're concerned, the sort of the legal requirements in terms of reporting were fulfilled?
No, sir. I don't believe that our work was reported by anyone, not by Leave EU, not by UKIP, and not by Cambridge Analytica.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ian Lucas.
You mentioned Steve Bannon facilitated the introduction. Was that to Leave EU or to UKIP?
I don't recall. I wasn't copied into those communications, but I was pretty sure that he was involved in the setting up of the first meetings. That could have also been true of our meeting with Vote Leave, which was then canceled. I'm not sure of the exact relationships there.
So when you were pitching, did you think you were pitching to UKIP or to Leave EU?
I knew that I was pitching to Leave EU, although Matthew Richardson, the party secretary, was part of those meetings almost every time. So I did know that UKIP was a public supporter of the Leave EU campaign, and that much of the work that we were being asked to design in our proposals was going to be either parallel or joint work streams.
Now, I'm concerned about the transfer of data between UKIP and Leave EU. And Mr. Richardson, who is the secretary of UKIP, you said?
I believe that he was. I don't know if he still is.
Yeah. He appears to have been concerned about it as well, because he commissioned a legal opinion on the issue in October of 17th of November 2015. Well, did he commission it?
He commissioned it alongside ourselves as Cambridge Analytica because we wanted to understand the implications of the usage of the data that UKIP was transferring to us, what we could do with it, not only for that first project, but for the remainder of the Brexit campaign engagements.
That's very odd because if Mr. Richardson commissioned the opinion, his name is at the end of it, giving the opinion. So he's commissioned an opinion of himself and then given the opinion that he perhaps wanted to hear, and that was presented to Cambridge Analytica. Is that right?
So I believe that it was technically paid for and commissioned by Cambridge Analytica to Philip Koppel QC, where Matthew Richardson was a part of it. But yes,
just by clarification, Matthew Richardson and Philip Koppel QC have signed this opinion.
Yes.
Now, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not an expensive lawyer. I'm not a QC. I'm not a QC. And my understanding is that, for example, the Labour Party wouldn't be permitted to transfer data to Stronger In, for example, because they're different organisations. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably not normal professional practice to be one of the people giving a legal opinion to your own organization.
No, but about transferring data, we just talk about transferring data. Do you think it is lawful, and you work in this field, to transfer data from a political party to a separate campaign in connection with leaving the EU?
Not without the specific opt-in of the individuals that data is concerned on.
Yeah. Do you know what this opinion was used for?
This opinion was used for the phase 1 small piece of work that we undertook.
So was it presented, for example, to Aaron Banks?
I'm not sure. I do know that that Matthew Richardson sent it to me and Julian Wheatland in order for us to understand, or at least give that to our data scientists and our legal team to understand what could be undertaken with that data. Now, there's quite a few more implications of that opinion, which was that right after, during our analysis of this UKIP data set, we were asked by Aaron Banks to consider combining the 3 work streams that we were talking to him and his colleagues about. Those work streams are for Leave EU, the UK Independence Party, and Eldon or Go Skippy Insurance. So we made a 4th proposal.
That's a private company.
Yes, it is.
Which is owned by Mr. Banks, just for
I
clarification.
believe so, yes.
So he was transferring data, it appears, between a private company, a political party, and a campaign to leave the EU.
Well, I have 2 points on that. One is that he asked us to design a strategy where we could work with Leave EU, UKIP, and Eldon Insurance data together. If you'll see in the 4th proposal that I turned in to Aaron Banks, it shows this diagram here. Complementary work streams for UKIP, Leave EU, and Eldon Insurance. Now, we were asked if there was possibly, a savings that could have been achieved by running these 3 programs together instead of separately. So I believe that legal opinion was one of many that would have had to have been undertaken if we were actually going to be contracted to do this piece of work. We were never contracted to do this piece of work, although from other evidence that has been given by individuals such as Dr. Emma Bryant and by Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore themselves to the press and to others upon knowledge of recording, I do believe that this work was carried out, just not by Cambridge Analytica. It's of note within that legal opinion that I provided to you in, I think, point 64, paragraph 64, that Mr. Philip Koppel specifically says that the data under no circumstances should be transferred abroad. And that's specifically because Cambridge Analytica is a foreign company that would need to be written out in the contract. And all of this data would have to be analyzed within the United Kingdom. So I currently, in regards to this proposal and work I believe that was undertaken with or without us, that there's a few specific concerns of legality, concerns which I believe are also concerns of the committee. Firstly, it's in relation to breaches of electoral law for chargeable work, some of which I did, which was never paid for and unreported to the Electoral Commission. Secondly, I have evidence from my own eyes of possible breaches of the Data Protection Act concerning the usage of commercial and personal data of individuals in the Elgin Insurance database and possibly the UKIP database being used for the benefit of the Leave EU campaign. I'm just going to expand on that slightly, which is that when I did visit the Elgin Insurance and Leave EU headquarters, which was the same building with the same staff, that when a senior data scientist and myself spent time with their phone bank, I was told by the people using the phone bank that the individuals that they were calling were out of the insurance database. Now, thirdly, there's the question of whether personal data of British citizens was sent abroad, specifically to Mississippi for processing by Aaron Banks's firm Big Data Dolphins, and contrary to the Data Protection Act and to the advice of Mr. Philip Koppel, QC.
We also know that Cambridge Analytica shared data with AIQ when there was a contract, and of course AIQ is a Canadian company. So presumably that was in contradiction of this provision as well.
I can infer that from the evidence that has been submitted by others, but because I don't have any knowledge of that myself, I couldn't expand that far.
Do you know if any other private businesses shared data with Cambridge Analytica through UKIP?
No, although we were exploring matching data from Experian, which is a big data vendor that we work with in the United States. We were exploring licensing that in the United Kingdom for matching to the UKIP database and to any database of individuals that would have been collected by Leave EU.
Do you know if Wetherspoons ever shared any information with UKIP?
No, I don't know. If there's evidence of that, that would be interesting, of course.
Yes, it would be very interesting. Yeah. Can you confirm that that within the SCL group, you talked about SCL group, including Cambridge Analytica, very much as one organisation, and the picture that I have is of data being shared freely between all of the companies within that group. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure which entity actually owned the database, but most of the staff within Cambridge Analytica and the SCL group had 2 business cards and 2 emails. We worked for SCL group and Cambridge Analytica in parallel.
When I spoke to Mr. Knicks, he said that SCL could transfer data to Cambridge Analytica, but for security reasons, Cambridge Analytica couldn't transfer data to SCL because SCL had security clearance. Does that ring any bells with you?
Yeah, so it's a very complicated structure, but part of
Some
the way...
might say deliberately.
Possibly. So the SCL group originally was the parent company for all of these other divisions, including Cambridge Analytica. Now, once Cambridge Analytica became a very popular global brand, Cambridge Analytica then subsumed most of those companies and divisions, and the SCL Group became just our defense company, or SCL Group or SCL Gov, based in Arlington.
But Cambridge Analytica had access to the SCL database.
So I believe once the company was rebranded, that there should have been at least no access between those two companies, except for the contractual obligations that you're discussing. Although I don't believe up until that point that there was a difference between the SCL Group and the Cambridge Analytica database. Now, that would be slightly concerning when we're talking about the difference between commercial and political and defense work. I've had those concerns in the past because when I joined the company, I didn't remember this, but upon reflection, I've found documents that from Nigel Oakes, the co-founder of the SCL Group, who was in charge of our defense division, stating that the target audience analysis methodology, TAA, used to be export controlled by the British government. So that would mean that the methodology was considered a weapon, weapons grade communications tactics, which means that we had to tell the British government if that was going to be deployed in another country outside of the United Kingdom. Now I understand that designation was removed in 2015.
Can I ask you a question about the invoice that was issued by Cambridge Analytica to UKIP? Do you know why that was issued to UKIP as opposed to Leave EU?
Yes, so Leave EU didn't have any data yet in the beginning because it was just a campaign. So we went to UKIP where, they were participating in our meetings jointly with Leave EU executives in order to find some data to begin working on. And that was the UKIP membership data and the survey data that was provided to us for the phase 1 piece of work.
But the intention was that the work that you were doing was relating to a pitch to work for Leave EU.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify on what you said there about the target audience analysis work, that was part of the proposal that we put together for Leave.eu, that's correct? Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that the proposal was for Leave.eu to use what you call weapons-grade communications techniques against the UK population.
Well, I believe that in 2015, target audience analysis no longer had an export designation. I don't know at what point that was dropped off, but I believe that it still existed in 2014 when I joined the company.
What do you mean by export designation?
So I don't actually know the complexities of this, but I believe every year or every few years, something that has something that is export controlled, that has to be renewed, and that wasn't renewed. I don't know what you need to qualify for that, or what the implications of that are.
But basically, these were techniques where previously you would have needed to inform the authorities that you were intending to use these in the UK. Would that be correct? That's
what I was told by Nigel Oakes. Yes.
Yeah, and then when that designation was removed, it could be done without informing the authorities. But nevertheless, it's still the same product. It's if you like, a product that was considered so dangerous that its use was restricted, but nevertheless was going to be, the intention was that strategy would be used in the referendum campaign.
Well, the interesting thing is that actually the target audience analysis uses a lot less data than psychographic micro-targeting, which is what we use in the United States.
Yeah. Joe Stevens.
Can I just ask you a few questions about the Eldon insurance and the Leave.eu stuff? Mm-hmm. But first of all, this invoice for the work that you did on phase 1, which you've described, mm-hmm. Can you remember the dates between which you did the work? When it started roughly and when it finished roughly? Yes,
I believe we took receipt of the data in late October, although I wasn't present in the office. I was in DC when a member of the UK Independence Party showed up to SCL Group's HQ in Mayfair with a big computer stack. that was their form of transferring data. They actually brought an old desktop into the office physically, and we took the membership data and the survey data off of that computer and began analyzing it. Usually that type of matching and modeling and analysis takes us 2 to 3 weeks. I don't know how many days our data scientists actually spent on that, but we estimated that the work was worth, £41,500 based on the time spent.
Sorry to interrupt you. And is that on market rates, or was that on a...
No, that was generally what we were charging at the time. And that was in preparation for the public press conference that we did on November 18th. Mm-hmm. So, it would have been a couple of weeks of work leading up to that. And on November 18th, the day before and the day after, I spent those days in Millbank Tower, the Leave EU London offices, briefing everybody that was working at those offices on my findings, and working with the communications and social media teams on how you could use that insight in order to craft different communications campaigns.
Okay, thank you. And so when did the work stop, the work that you were doing on that phase?
It would have been, within a couple days after that. The rest of it was putting together this joint proposal, which took quite a few weeks to do, to understand the complexities of how the data could possibly be combined, although we would have had to have probably a few more legal opinions drawn up to understand that we could do this, or undertaken opt-in campaigns with the individuals whose data were contained on those databases to undertake this. So it was end of November, the last time I actually engaged with any individuals in Leave EU myself, although in January this proposal was presented by Julian Wheatland and Alexander Knicks to, I believe, Aaron Banks, Liz Bilney, Andy Wigmore, and Matthew Richardson.
Okay, thank you. And you said, I think, earlier that this actual proposal, although you didn't then undertake this work for them, for Aaron Banks, it has subsequently been done.
Yes.
So do you know who has done that work?
So both Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore have told multiple individuals that they took my proposal and copied it, and that they created their own Cambridge Analytica, which they called Big Data Dolphins, in partnership with the data science department at Ole Miss University of Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. So presumably, and stop me if I'm wrong, implementing this proposal involves, based on what you've said, taking data from UK customers of Eldon Insurance, Go Skippy Insurance, UKIP members, and Vote Leave data, and
Leave EU data.
Yes, Leave EU data, and that goes over into the United States.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether or not Cambridge Analytica have got a continuing relationship other than what you've already described? I'm particularly interested in Julian Wheatland's involvement in this with Aaron Banks.
I don't believe so. He never paid us for any of our work, never accepted any of our subsequent proposals, and has bragged about copying our company and recreating it for himself. So I don't believe there would be a relationship left to have.
Okay, thank you. And I know in your written evidence you mentioned the fact that there was a discussion, or something was talked about with Aaron Banks about the use of the Eldon and Go Skippy data. And if I can quote from your written evidence, you said Aaron Banks said, quote, "It's my data," unquote. So he is using customer data from Go Skippy and Eldon Insurance for other purposes.
That's what I saw with my own eyes when I spent a day at the Bristol headquarters. I was brought there under the understanding that I was going to Leave EU's headquarters, and it became very quickly obvious that this was actually Eldon Insurance, an Eldon Insurance headquarters, which is also the parent company of Go Skippy, and maybe that's a brand, one of their brands. all of the staff there were employed by an insurance company, and almost none of the staff there knew anything about political campaigning. A lot of what I said to them and what I presented to them was novel. They had never heard of any of these tactics. They had never participated in politics before, and openly said, you know, I work for an insurance company, so help.
So the people in the call centre, why were you going to see them? Were they going to be working on the Leave.eu campaign?
They were actively working on the Leave EU campaign when I was there.
And how many people were working in the call centre?
The call center was about the size of this room, maybe a little bit smaller, with at least probably 20 active callers. They all had a computer and a headset, making calls that I assume were normally sales calls or calls for customer assistance or advice. And instead, they were calling people to undertake a survey. They were talking to those people about their interest in leaving the European Union and issues around Brexit and leave or remain. We were sitting with those individuals specifically because we said it was unlikely that the survey that they were undertaking was up to scratch with what we would need for modeling. So we sat there to understand what data they were using, what surveys they were undertaking, and how we could improve upon that, so that that data could be used for nationwide modeling. I was under the impression by what they told me that every single individual that they were pulling up to call was actually a lead or a current customer of Eldon Insurance or Go Skippy.
And do you know for how long they'd been making those calls? I think you visited in the November, didn't you?
I believe I visited in November, yes. I would have to double check that, but it would have been end of October, early November. And they had probably already been doing that for a month or two, because we started having these conversations with them in September.
Right.
Yeah.
And this was a full-time call centre?
Yes.
With 20 people in it?
At least.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify on the dates, so the date of the legal opinion which you presented as written evidence, that's the date that was signed off as the day before the press launch for Leave.eu. So was this, are those two things connected? Was this commissioned just to check that the methodology or the way of working that would be presented at the press launch was in fact legal?
Yes, before I presented it to members of Leave EU.
Yeah, so there was a concern clearly within the organisation that that opinion needed to be sought before the official launch because there was some ambiguity.
The idea was directly after the press launch that we would begin phase 2 of the proposal, and we needed to understand what the legalities around beginning that second phase of work would be.
Yeah, but as Mr. Lucas mentioned earlier on, I mean, the existence of that opinion would seem to suggest that there clearly was a working relationship which was being tested here.
Of course,
yeah.
And we knew though that the data that was given to us by UKIP for phase 1 that we're allowed to model internal data for UKIP, but I wouldn't have been able to present that to Leave EU without that legal opinion, nor suggest that I could undertake phase 2 of the proposal or begin contractual negotiations over that.
Yeah. There were other obviously organisations involved in campaigning on the referendum question, aside from those that got the official designation. That includes organisations like Grassroots Out. Were they involved? Was data from Grassroots Out involved, accessible to the work you were doing? Was the intention to use that too?
I was no longer in conversation with any of these individuals when they became Grassroots Out.
Yeah.
That was way later, after Aaron Banks made it very clear that none of our contracts were going to be signed or our bills paid.
What from the email evidence you've supplied to us, and you referred to it in your statement as well, you clearly believe that Aaron Banks had approved the budget that was presented.
Yes, or at least Liz Bilney, who was the CEO of Leave EU at the time, and his right hand. She traveled with him everywhere and was in charge of multiple of his businesses or business engagements all over the world. So she had given us the green light in writing and verbally, and therefore I asked Julian, at the time our CFO, if we could have the go-ahead to begin work. He was in charge of our finances, and if he said, on a gentleman's agreement, go ahead while we wait for the legal opinion and the contract, then that was, my permission to go ahead.
So, in terms of the work that was done, the preparatory work that was done, so that was analysing the data that was available at Eldon and through Go Skippy to see what information they had and how that could be used. Is that
Yes.
because I imagine that data in and of itself it needs to be processed in some way to make it useful to a political campaign. Would that be?
It would have had to have been, yes. I was just kind of looking at what was available. Our senior data scientist that was there with me was looking to see what was there so that we understood how we could process it.
Yeah.
If we were
Could you, just for the benefit of the record on the committee, it might be quite helpful if you could almost like walk us through what the recommendation was. How do you process that data to make it useful to a political campaign? What do you need to add to it to make it work?
Right. So by nature of data science, the more that you know about an individual, the more accurate of an algorithm you can build to predict their behavior or predict their opinions or their personality or their emotions on a certain issue. So we would have taken the data that we had on their commercial activities, their political activities, the more data that we could pin back to their personally identifiable information. In the US, we would use first name, last name, and zip code or postcode and a birthday to make sure we were talking about the right person. And then you continue to append that data to get as deep of a data profile on an individual as possible. Sure. Then on top of that, you will, once you have data profiles on as many people across the country as possible, you would design a survey, a quantitative survey. I believe we said we're going to do 2 surveys of 40,000 individuals, and that's used as a training set. So when we know what 40,000 people would answer to specific questions about political ideology and issues, then we can build a model that gives us predictions on what everybody else would say.
And then presumably, would you then use tools like Facebook to help identify people from the training set and then find other people who are like them that Facebook can help you identify?
Exactly correct, yeah.
Thank you. Joe Stevens.
Can I just ask you a follow-up? The Eldon and Go Skippy insurance data, did they give you all the customers' data? Do you know how many people's data that you received?
I never received any data from the insurance company. We were only privy to what data points existed in their database. They probably told us how many individuals were in their database, and I can look through my emails
it would be
for
really
you
helpful
to see.
To know that.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Just how was it planned that Facebook data would be used? Would that be gathered during the course of the campaign and added to the training set, or was there Facebook data that was accessible already?
When I sat with their social media team, we looked at undertaking surveys on Facebook, similar to what Cambridge Analytica or the LCL group had done in the past. And I do believe that they began to do those surveys on Facebook without us, from what I understand, from what they've said to the media. But usually Facebook would just be used in terms of their targeting tools. You upload a certain database and that matches to individuals within Facebook, and then you can target a lookalike audience to those people so that you can find even more individuals who are as similar as possible to the individuals that you already know are likely to be interested in leaving the European Union.
So I believe Leave.eu talked about a lot of the work they did once after they didn't get the designation was through Facebook pages, getting people to sign up and register interest on a website, Leave.eu website. But presumably what they were doing then was getting contact emails and addresses from Facebook users, which they could then match against their data set to identify people in the data set against their Facebook profile and use that as the basis of targeting them and other Facebook users that had similar favourable opinions. Would that be?
It should have been the way that they were doing it, but it wasn't undertaken by Cambridge Analytica, so I can't say for sure what the exact methodology was.
How, just for our benefit, to be effective in this space, how big a kind of working set do you need to be able to then use that to create the basis for targeting the whole country in terms of voting?
Well, I believe that the algorithms that we built for Cambridge Analytica used at least 400 variables Now, it would be very difficult to have thousands of data points on individuals in the United Kingdom. So therefore, the models would be scientifically less accurate than what you can produce in the United States, for instance. I'm not a data scientist, so I wouldn't be able to say the minimum number of data points that you would require. But I do know that, for instance, there are other data science consultancies that will build an algorithm with 50 variables.
Okay.
So,
But how many individuals do you need to have profiled as part of your working set in order to use that as a model to help you target effectively others who are like them, and through them reach most of the electorate in an election? How big a sample set do you need to work from of individuals in order to achieve a successful campaign?
well, I mean, you would want millions in a country the size of the United Kingdom. At minimum, and be talking to tens of thousands of people to complete surveys, but it depends what level of accuracy and you'd be interested in having. Some people are fine with less than 95% confidence rate, for example. So it depends how exact you need to be.
But you still need a big group.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
but that can be achieved by licensing data sets from a company like Experian, where that's based on the entire country's credit profile. In the United States, that gives us basically everybody above the age of 18, 240 million Americans, just from going to one source.
What's fun about, from your experience with the Ted Cruz campaign, there's a lot of talk in the referendum about the value of door-to-door canvassing techniques and the ability to feed that data back into the system. But is the purpose of that not just to support voter turnout on election day with people going around and knocking on doors, which historically is what canvassing has been there for, but rather to enrich the overall data set that's being used during the campaign to target people with digital messages?
I would say these days it's much more important for data collection than turnout specifically. Turnout messages can be targeted to those individuals without a person going in person to speak to them. Yeah.
Thank you. Ian?
We know that there was a contact between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica about the use of data in, I think it was 2015 from memory. Did you know about that at the time?
Yes. So the first time that I heard anything about Facebook data in writing or even in a personal conversation that didn't have to do with those personality quizzes was in late April 2015. So Facebook had announced to all of their clients, and therefore to their clients' that they were going to close their personal data API, which allowed apps and their clients to have access to this data. So before the closing of this access, my chief data officer gave me and two of my colleagues a list of thousands of different groups on Facebook and asked us to choose 500 of them that we thought having the information of the individuals who liked those groups would be useful in our modeling for our new commercial business, which I was helping grow. So we chose 500 of those groups and turned that into, I suppose it's now GSR, although I wasn't aware of who we were getting them from at the time, in order to get the data of those individuals that liked the groups that we chose. We received that data and turned in that request on May 5th of 2015. So if Facebook actually closed that API in April, either a company contracted with Facebook was contributing their legal obligations, or they were selling us old data. I'm not sure. Now, 7 months later, in December 2015, an individual from Facebook contacted Cambridge Analytica to ask if we still had any Facebook data sets that we had received from Professor Kogan or GSR. We replied that yes, we had, but we had an agreement with GSR to have that data. Now, Facebook's agreement with GSR apparently said something different, that they weren't meant to have the data, and therefore any of their clients were no longer meant to have the data. So we agreed to delete it, but our chief data officer specifically said, we haven't contravened any contractual obligations, but at your request, we're happy to delete it. That deletion was apparently made in January 2016, which is quite a long time after no one was supposed to have access to those data sets anymore. I find it incredibly irresponsible that a company with as much money as Facebook, until a couple of weeks ago, it was worth $500 billion, had no due diligence mechanisms in place for protecting the data of British citizens, American citizens, or their users in general. Now, something else that is of note is that in March of 2016, I was copied into a back and forth conversation.
Before you go on, can I just ask you, how do you know that in January 2016 the data was deleted?
I don't know that it was deleted. I know that our chief data officer said it was deleted.
Okay, thank you.
To Facebook. And that was forwarded to me willingly in order to help deal with the questions from our clients around PR issues, because The Guardian had reported on this issue. Now, in March 2016, 6 or 8 weeks after our chief data officer said that those data sets were deleted, I have an email from one of our senior data scientists responding to a question that said that we were actually using Facebook-like data in our modeling. So that seems quite strange to me. If we had deleted all of the Facebook data sets, how we were still using that for modeling in March.
So your suspicion is that someone may have been continuing to use the Facebook data in March of 2016?
Yes, that's only upon reflection.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. And furthermore, you are not aware of Facebook having taken any steps to ensure that the assurance that they were given by Cambridge Analytica that the information had been deleted, you're not aware of them actually checking that?
They did not come and check that at all. That was the final communication, I believe, on the topic.
Thank you.
I know Paul Farley wants to come in, but let's finish off on Facebook, if that's okay. Yeah. Facebook have said that they believe that Alexander Kogan had access to data profiles relating to about up to 1 million people in the UK. Mm-hmm. Did you ever get any sense of how many UK profiles were part of the data set that Alexander Kogan had collected?
No, I didn't even know who Professor Kogan was when I joined the company. Once he was mentioned in an email where he was referred to as Alex Kogan, a psychologist that we work with. So I actually didn't know much about him or GSR at all. So a lot of this is new information to me, unfortunately.
But with Cambridge Analytica, did you get any sense of how much Facebook profile data it had related to UK users of the platform?
I was told that we never had any data on UK citizens because I was constantly pitching for commercial contracts here, and I didn't really have much to back up my proposals that said that we could undertake similar kinds of work as we did in the United States.
Yeah.
So.
Can I ask as well? You said in your testimony, you referred to it that you were asked to look through lists of Facebook groups and choose 500 groups, presumably. Why groups as opposed to pages or profiles?
I don't know. I suppose it was just a good source of data. If people liked this particular group, it was a topic that they were interested in. So that ranged from restaurants to pop stars to anything you can imagine. It was personal interests.
Are groups more open? Is it easier to see who's joined various groups if it's an open group than it would be on a page?
That's possible, yes.
It's just quite interesting because it's an issue we've raised with Facebook before, and I'm sure we'll do next week, is the significance of Facebook groups as a means of analysing user behaviour and disseminating information, because in their official responses to us they always, if you like, downplay the significance of groups and focus more on pages and on profiles. But I just find it interesting that was particularly highlighted in your case.
Yeah.
Groups question. Does the data relating to the groups, does that only relate to people who've liked the group, or is it people who have visited the group as well?
As far as I know, we were only receiving data from individuals who had liked the group. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Just on the strand, you said earlier, Ms. Kaiser, that it's not as easy to get as many data points. I assume that means bits of information on UK citizens as the US. Why do you say that?
Because the US is a by default opt-in country, and European nations are by default opt-out. So someone has to opt in for you to hold their data or use it for particular purposes in this country, which means that there's a lot of data sets that are never collected and never held that are by default collected in the United States and can be sold on, licensed and modeled.
Okay, but you also say it's important in your evidence, it's important also to emphasise that during most of my time at Cambridge Analytica, the culture and assumptions of the firm and the wider data brokerage and ad tech industries within which it operated were a bit Wild West, with citizens' data being scraped, resold and modelled nilly-willy. So how does that fit with your statement about the UK citizens?
That's what Alexander used to say about the United States, which is why even though the headquarters was in London, he said that now is the time to enter into business in the United States as quickly as possible while the data laws were still the Wild West.
Okay, so while that may have been Cambridge Analytica's attitude, it may not have been the same attitude held by other companies here, which hold, like perhaps Experian, that hold data on individuals in sharing it with other companies.
Yeah, so the data laws in the United Kingdom don't allow for a lot of the data work that can be easily undertaken.
So
in the
other
US.
companies might have been more ethical than Cambridge Analytica.
I would hope so.
Just a second question. Presumably when you were pitching to vote, pitching to leave.eu, it would have occurred to you to have proposed incorporating what data UKIP had collected on people from their canvassing and other activities. That was part of the proposal, was it?
It was only part of the proposal after I had given in a separate proposal for UKIP, Leave EU, and Eldon Insurance, and then I was asked by Aaron Banks if there could possibly be either a cost savings or a benefit to running this joint program.
And did it occur to you, or were there any other discussions about possibly getting data from other political sources, for instance, Brexit-friendly MPs, be they Conservative, Labour, otherwise, from their constituencies?
That would have been helpful, although most of those MPs would have had to run an opt-in program to the individuals that supported them that they held data on. So if you ask people to opt in for that particular type of campaign, you're unlikely to get a great response.
And did it occur, or did you discuss possibly at HQ level, there are officials of different parties who take different views on Brexit, perhaps of gaining access to data that's held by any party's political HQ, be it Labour, UKIP or Conservative?
So the only reason why it was so easy to engage with the UK Independence Party was because it was the only party that fully supported only one campaign. Every other party was divided amongst party lines.
Or neutral.
Or neutral, yes.
So you're not aware of any approaches, successful or otherwise, to friendly MPs or party headquarters.
I'm not aware of that. Although we, I say we, Leave EU did contract famous demographer Ian Warren in order to explore the types of data that were available about Labour voters and how that could be used in their communications campaigns.
Yeah, I'm talking about the canvassing data that we have.
Canvassing data, yeah, I don't believe.
We have Experian data, but it tends to tell us what we already know about where people live, quite frankly.
Right. As far as I know, those communications never took place, no.
Okay.
It's possible.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we're going to move on to just to ask a few questions about some of the other work you've done aside from the referendum campaign. And I think, Paul, you were going to start us off with that, and then we're going to come on to Chris.
Yes. Thanks, Chair. I wasn't sure what order we were in. I wanted to talk about your evidence about Nigeria. And in that evidence, you quite rightly say that opposition research is part and parcel of politics. and that you introduced a suitable opposition research company, which was not called Black Cube.
No.
What was it called?
I don't remember, actually, to be honest. I never had a contract with that company. I introduced them to the client, and they contracted individually.
But they were suitable.
As far as they presented to me, but I didn't know any other opposition research companies that had experience in Nigeria.
You can't remember the name?
No, but I can try to find it for you.
Please.
Yes, definitely.
We are, but obviously opposition, sort of legitimate opposition research doesn't include hacking into people's personal details, their medical records, or anything else that might be embarrassing, including criminal records or whatever might be available. And there was a report in The Guardian regarding this now infamous company, Black Cube, that said that I'll quote it. It was The Guardian on the 21st of March this year. Staff working on the campaigns, this is Nigeria, say in early 2015 they met Israeli cybersecurity contractors in Cambridge Analytica's offices in Mayfair, London. Employees say they were told the meeting was arranged by Brittany Kaiser, a senior director at the firm. Is that true?
So I was in touch with my team that had been in Nigeria and had been working with these people on the ground. I wasn't aware of what work they had done, but I did know that they were coming to headquarters to present some information that they had obtained from the opposing campaign. So they came to the office for maybe an hour one day and plugged something into a computer to show some pieces of information that they had obtained from the opposing campaign. Now, I wasn't working in operations on this campaign. We had a full team that was sat in the Abuja Hilton, in fact, that was running this on the ground. It was only a 3-week campaign, so this wasn't a campaign of much significance, to be honest. But they had obtained some documents that said that the other candidate had visited hospitals, that the other candidate was being consulted to by my former boss, David Axelrod. He used to manage the Obama campaign when I worked there, even though David had said in the press that he was no longer working for them, and then a lot of other miscellaneous information. Now, the clients didn't find any of this useful at all. It resulted in 1 or 2 articles that were put out by the local campaign team in the international press that said David Axelrod's still consulting to that campaign. Nothing else came of it, and I understand that the clients did not continue to hire those consultants because they didn't think the information was useful.
Well, there's further information about activities in other countries which colleagues want to talk about. But those Israeli cybersecurity contractors that were referred to in this Guardian article, they came from this company Black Cube, did they?
Not to my knowledge. I've never heard the name Black Cube until I saw it in the press, actually.
Do you know what company they came from?
This would have been the same company that we were talking about, but I believe that they were campaign consultants that had worked in African elections before. Okay,
but had they been from Black Cube without your knowledge of the name of the company that was employing them, it would have been true to have said that you arranged this meeting in London?
Yes, I was present at that meeting, and right. I knew that they were coming. Yes.
Okay, and what was your reaction to the activities? Well, that was my next question, whether you were at the meeting. What was your reaction to the activities that they described?
They showed me a video of sitting in campaign meetings with the opposition, so I was kind of surprised that they had managed to achieve that, because they were actually sitting there with the candidate, campaign manager, other high-level individuals on the campaign. I'd never seen that before from campaign consultants. So I was kind of shocked that they were able to, I don't want to say achieve something like that as if it was great, but it was definitely shocking at their kind of skill level at going undercover and achieving that kind of trust from the other side. But they obtained data while they were in that campaign, which I can't confirm how that was actually obtained, to be honest. And then they presented that to me. I didn't think any of it was useful, and obviously the name David Axelrod pops out at me because I know the man personally and used to work under his direction. And so that piece of data was turned into a press article, and that's all.
Did it occur to you that modus operandi, going undercover like that, was, if not useful, was unethical?
It was something that I was quite used to in U.S. Politics. A lot of times opposition researchers are sent to become parts of local campaign teams or to take part in local rallies
To
and
infiltrate.
film people off camera.
To infiltrate.
Indeed, yes.
So you were quite comfortable with that?
It's commonplace in politics, fortunately or unfortunately.
That's not here, I don't think. Unless I'm so naive that I've been taken for a ride for the last 20 years.
I don't know, but I would say questioning the ethics of it is correct, definitely, in that in hindsight I'm no longer interested in being involved with activities of that sort.
I mean, that Guardian article which I'm referring to goes on to talk about the local various things that are allegedly being obtained by this team of cyber contractors and the team on the ground actually then panicking and pulling out. Were you aware of all that?
I was
before this
never
article?
aware of any panicking. I was told that when the election was meant to take place, which was February 14th of 2015, we had only had people there for 3 weeks. The election was then pushed forward by a couple of weeks, and the clients did not want to pay for our contractors to stay there for any longer, so they came back and did not stay in the country all the way until election day.
We've had copies of pretty horrendous video that was produced as part of that working campaign. What sort of work on that campaign, including that video, were you aware of?
So I was only aware of all of the campaign materials at the end of the campaign when I was given the portfolio, which I've given as evidence to the committee. Now I do understand that there was one video that used violent images. That was specifically because I was working with a lot of individuals that did not believe that Buhari was a legitimate candidate because he was a war criminal that had slaughtered people in the 80s, specifically children, and burned their bodies in the streets to initiate fear in the citizens. So there were a lot of human rights lawyers that were trying to stop him from being a political candidate, and that was a reminder to anyone under the age of 30 who would have not been privy to that information, they would have not been born yet, of who that man actually was.
So that was part of the portfolio and you were fully aware of it?
At the end, yes.
Of the campaign?
After it had already been pushed out and used, then I was made aware of the full campaign portfolio, yes.
On that particular film that Mr. Farron refers to, the core message was actually that he would establish Sharia law in Nigeria and that people would face punishment, beatings and death as a consequence of extreme Sharia law being introduced into the country, more than his previous record. That's correct, isn't it?
You can look through all of the videos in the portfolio. There were quite a few, but I didn't produce them and I wasn't aware of them being produced.
Sorry,
I saw them afterwards.
You
yes.
saw them afterwards, but this was what, in 2015?
Yes.
Did it not make you feel uncomfortable?
Yes.
But you stayed at Cambridge Analytica until 2018.
I did, but a decision that would have been made by a contractor that didn't even work for our company, that full-time, that was running that campaign, a gentleman under the name of Sam Patton, had nothing to do with the rest of the company. That was one video amongst about 50 or 60 pieces of creative that were put in local newspapers, radio, Facebook, Twitter. So it wasn't concerning enough for me to quit my full-time job, no.
Okay, people might take a different view, but it depends on their personalities, of course. I've got a few more questions, but Ian.
So speaking of on this point, when Mr. Knicks gave evidence, I asked him to produce one example of a piece of work that Cambridge Analytica had rejected on ethical grounds. And he has since come back. He said he would come back to me. And he said he cannot produce one example of a piece of work that he has rejected on ethical grounds. Have you ever rejected anything on ethical grounds in terms of campaign at Cambridge Analytica?
I have never been under authority to say yes or no to any piece of creative. I was not in campaign operations, so.
Now, we've heard about this particular example. Are there any other examples that made you uncomfortable?
I have been offered introductions to clients that I refused to meet with before, such as the Alternative for Germany and Marine Le Pen's campaign. I refused to even get on a phone call with them.
But not UKIP?
Not UKIP, no.
Can I just ask, who asked you to meet with AFD and with Marine Le Pen?
I believe it could have been the same individual that introduced us to the UK Independence Party, but I am not sure because I was not introduced to them directly. The introductions were suggested that they could be made.
Sorry, so you're talking about Steve Bannon. So was it suggested to you that Steve Bannon could make an introduction to both Marine Le Pen and Alternative for Germany?
It was, I do believe we were actually introduced via email to one of the communications officers for Alternative for Germany. I'd have to check who made that introduction, and it was offered that Marine Le Pen's campaign could be introduced to us. I don't think I was ever told who that introduction was going to be made by. I think it was Julian Wheatland who asked if we wanted the introduction, or asked one of my colleagues who spoke French if we wanted the introduction, and we had a meeting about it and decided no.
Okay, but why do you believe that Steve Bannon was involved in that process?
Because I don't believe that Julian had connections to any of these parties.
Because the one person who does have connections to those parties, apart from Steve Bannon, is Nigel Farage as well. Do you believe he?
It's possible.
Okay, but you didn't see anything. You weren't told that experience.
I wasn't told that, but I can look back in my emails and see if an individual was referenced. Yes.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
More questions, because the curiosity questions, Chair, if you just allow me. Because you seem to, Ms. Kaiser, you seem to have travelled a long way from an idealistic intern in Barack Obama's campaign to working for a number of years for a company that keeps, an organisation that keeps pretty unsavoury company in wishing to make pitches to, well, let's leave Nigeria to one side, making pitches to far-right political parties, whether or not you turn them down. Didn't that make you uncomfortable at all?
Yes, which is why I agreed to never work in operations for those campaigns. Meeting with those people is very different than actually crafting and pushing out those messages in terms of personal emotional attachment. But I originally joined the company because I had been frustrated for many years while working on campaigns for human rights and for liberal parties that I supported that were unsuccessful or unmeasurable. So the Strategic Communication Laboratory is always boasted of being able to measure effectiveness of campaigns, and I joined to help grow their social division. So being able to use science of communications in order to achieve better results for UN agencies, for NGOs, CBOs, or parties that I supported was very interesting for me, yes.
Could I, just your evidence, and again, you'll forgive me for my ignorance, you make reference to a time in March when you first spoke to The Guardian.
Yes.
When was that? Was that after their article about Nigeria?
I think it was within 48 hours after that, yes.
So it was after that. Was it after Mr. Knicks had been suspended?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, we can do the timeline. Can I just ask you a very personal question? How old are you?
I'm 30 years old.
30 years old. You're very lucky to be 30. And in your, I don't know much about your background, but in your emails, you've got PhD candidate, MPhil, LLM, MA Hons. Could you just tell us the background of all those?
Yeah, of course. I moved to Edinburgh in 2005 to undertake MA with honors in international relations. So that was what would be considered a 3-year undergrad, 1-year master's, but 1 MA. And then I went to University of London, Birkbeck, to undertake an LLM in international human rights law, which I completed. And then I went to Middlesex University to do an MPhil and a PhD in international law and human rights. The topic was preventive diplomacy to stop atrocity crimes. And I did the first year and a half, which was the MPhil, and then passed into the PhD and did the first 2.5 years. I was still writing that PhD while I was working for Alexander Knicks, and he asked me if I would put that on hold in order to dedicate myself fully to work for the company.
And it was during these studies that you volunteered for the Obama campaign?
Yes.
Your CV also says you, in between times, you established an inward investment company in Libya. What was that?
I did, yes. It was called the PACE Group. I had written about Libya for years in my human rights work, and I wanted to go there to do human rights research for my upcoming degree. Unfortunately, you can't get a visa to do that. So in some of the conferences that I attended, I met somebody who was doing business with a media company based in Tripoli and London. And they invited me to be a part of a new company that they were starting, which I did join, and that was the PACE Group, specifically to promote...
P-A-C-E?
P-A-C-E, yeah. And I joined that company, which was based between Tripoli and London, in order to put together international conferences that would bring together politicians and business people to talk about renegotiating diplomatic relations post-Gaddafi era and renegotiating Gaddafi era investment contracts with the hope of stabilizing the country after the revolution.
And what happened to that?
So it was successful for about 1.5 years until I was hired out of that company by a gentleman called Michael Thomas, who ran Pathfinder Trade and Invest, UKTI partnered trade association. So I became director of operations of that company about 1.5 years into working for the PACE Group.
And last year you got involved in something called Bueno Capital.
Yes.
Which is not a chocolate company.
No, it isn't. It's a blockchain advisory and development firm out of Zurich.
And that was while you were working for Cambridge Analytica?
Yes, it was, and one of the reasons why Alexander and I could not come to an agreement on what a consultancy role for me would look like. I don't believe he thought I could help grow a new company as well as working for him.
And was he involved in that, or have you got any business relationships or personal relationships still with Alexander Knicks?
Not at the moment, no.
No. But you might have in the future?
Right now it would be rather uncomfortable to do so, okay. I think.
I just wanted to ask a final question, and this is because I used to be a journalist, and it would be a question that would occur to me to ask of any source or anyone giving testimony like this, because you've been very, very active in your in your life on all different sides of lots of fences. So
Yes.
Don't take this the wrong way. It's a standard question. In your life, have you ever worked for, paid or unpaid, or provided information to any country's intelligence agency, their representatives or associated organisations, or otherwise acted in any way so that you might reasonably be described as an intelligence service, asset or resource?
No, although I was traveling to a lot of countries that were of interest to the U.S. government, so whenever I would come back to D.C., I would go and brief the State Department on where I had been, who I had met with, and what I had done. But that was the State Department, not an intelligence agency.
And have you ever been approached, it's not your fault if you have been, by any intelligence agencies or their representatives to ask you to work for them or provide information to them?
I believe that I would have, although they wouldn't properly identify themselves. I've been taught what to look out for. My grandfather was a military intelligence officer for 27 years and knew when I was young that that would be a possibility and told me what to look out for and to say no.
Okay. And just a final question. You're a US national?
Yes, only.
Are you only? No joint
Only.
nationalities?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Ms. Kaiser. I want to take you back to the Nigerian work that you did. Was that the first work that you undertook for SCL?
That was the first contract that I won for the company, yes. It wasn't the first work that I tried to work on, but yes, that was the first successful contract that I won, and it was my job to win contracts, so yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. You were working on behalf of the Good Luck Jonathan campaign?
Not on behalf of the campaign, no. This was more of a crisis communications campaign on behalf of private individuals who did not believe that Buhari was the right candidate for the country. Goodluck Jonathan's campaign didn't know we were in the country.
Right. I understand that your name's on an email to a Libyan individual whose Nigerian business partner paid SCL for that work. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
It's been alleged to me that on this matter you also worked with somebody called Chase Ergen from St Kitts and Nevis. Does that sound familiar?
I do know him, yes. He's not from St. Kitts, but he's American.
It's also been alleged to me that the fellow that paid SCL for this work was rewarded with being given a diplomatic passport from Dominica as a result of that. Is that anything you know about?
I do know that the clients that paid us to undertake that work in Nigeria met with the Prime Minister of that country in Davos during January of that year.
And any idea what happened at that meeting?
No.
It's been alleged to me that a diplomatic passport was obtained by the Nigerian fellow that was paying you for this, and that a payment to the Dominican Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit.
That is the correct Prime Minister, yes. And I believe that these clients were quite scared of what would happen if Buhari were to become president. Again, that was a consistent message throughout their entire engagement with us, that they were actually scared for their lives and for their families' lives. So I was involved in helping set up that meeting where they could explore having an option to leave the country with their families to somewhere safe if their lives were to be threatened. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So that this was the person who was also paying you, the Nigerian fellow was the one who was paying SCL?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Can I just clarify something from your written statement? And a couple of colleagues have asked about this today, but I just want to clarify something in my own mind. On Brexit, UKIP and Eldon Insurance, in your written evidence, you say, Cambridge Analytica was originally engaged with Aaron Banks, Andy Wigmore and Matthew Richardson to design parallel proposals for Leave.eu, Go Skibby Stroke Eldon Insurance and the UK Independence Party. You're talking about them having parallel proposals, but did Messrs Banks, Wigmore and Richardson approach you together, or did they all happen to approach you individually?
My first meeting was with all of them in one room, and Liz Bilney.
And were they all there representing Leave.eu, Go Skippy, Stroke Eldon Insurance and the UKIP Independence Party, or was one representing Leave.eu, one representing the Go Skippy and one representing UKIP?
I believe that all of them at the time were representing Leave EU, and that was the main conversation. Julian Wheatland and I had prepared a pitch for Leave EU, and those were the individuals in attendance. Now, just like many of our other clients around the world, if they were going to engage with us on one project, some people would ask for a savings if they were to do multiple projects with us, which we have offered to people in the past. So I think when they saw the numbers that we were asking for, they started to look at other work that we could do, and also started to look at where else we would be able to get data when Leave EU didn't have any data when they first approached us.
Right, so there are three individuals, three organisations. One organisation, Leave.eu, is the lead organisation, but the three individuals were also looking at collectively at the other two organisations as well, and how they could be involved.
Yes, we definitely had multiple conversations about how each project could benefit the other.
Okay, thank you. Did you appear on the and give a presentation to the launch of Leave.eu?
Yes, I did.
You must have been a bit disappointed then when you subsequently didn't do any work for them.
And we didn't do any further work for them after that day.
So
yes.
you had done some work. What was the nature of the work that you had done so far?
We had taken receipt of UK Independence Party data and the survey data to do modelling and analysis that would inform Leave EU communications. Now we were waiting for that legal opinion on how that could be used, and we were given that on the day of the launch. So I don't know if the rest of that data was ever combined with Leave EU campaign data, although Andy Wigmore and Aaron Banks' statement to the press would suggest so.
But you were surprised, having appeared on that platform, not then to be taken on a little bit further.
Yeah, to never, for Aaron Banks to have never paid any any invoice or signed a contract, although I wasn't on a commission structure for the company, so it didn't make any personal difference to me.
Can I then take you therefore to this invoice that we've been looking at this morning for 41,500? Was it ever paid?
So I understand from the press 2 days ago that Aaron Banks made a donation to UKIP in the amount of £42,000 a week before the vote. I don't know if that was housekeeping in relation to that particular invoice, though when a representative from UKIP was asked about it, they said yes, they received that donation, which I believe was to cover that invoice. They just decided not to pass on the funds to Cambridge Analytica. So I believe that because of that transfer, that they, through making that transfer, are admitting that work was done that needed to be paid for.
But did the money ever reach Cambridge Analytica?
No.
So why did Cambridge Analytica just shrug the shoulders and leave it at that?
Because
£41,000 seems like quite, a fair chunk to me.
Not for our company at the time. We were pitching for much larger sums of work, and it became clear that that wasn't going to happen. In the sums of 500,000 to 800-something thousand pounds. We were really hoping that that was the work that was going to be agreed upon. So after contractual disputes and not getting them to sign the contract, not getting them to pay the invoice, eventually those conversations fizzled out. Although I don't think we stopped trying to get that money until even maybe after the referendum vote.
Did you ever consider legal action?
I remember there was conversations about possibly putting the money in escrow until we maybe did more work for them. I don't think that ever happened, and I question why there was no legal action taken, and I question why our company felt the need to never talk about this particular issue that we had with potential clients who, never signed on the dotted line, so were never official clients. I feel no need to protect them. I don't know if anyone at Cambridge Analytica felt the need to protect them for some reason.
It doesn't sound a very reputable way to go about business. If you've done the work for them, you can be fairly expected to get the money off them.
Yes, well, because they never signed the contract, we never turned in the report. I only used the report to brief and work with the teams that were relevant to making use of that information, which I would normally say would be chargeable days of consultancy. But no, I never handed over the report at the request of my superiors.
Okay, and as you're saying, 41,000 in the great scheme of things wasn't that much, and business was potentially booming at the time.
In the United States, yes.
Okay.
We had no other engagements in the United Kingdom.
The correspondence address for Cambridge Analytica LLC on that invoice is Suite 1000, 8383 Wiltshire Boulevard. Is that correct?
Suite 1000 and
8383 Wiltshire Boulevard.
Oh yes, that was our address in Arlington, not in Arlington, in Virginia, was it?
Is that right? Yeah, I think so.
Yes. Yeah, I helped open that office in Virginia. It was in Alexandria, exactly, which was our DC office until we moved to 1901 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where it is.
Is that the same? Is that 8383 Wiltshire Boulevard, Suite 1000, the same address as Breitbart?
No, that was Breitbart offices. I don't know where their main office is, but they definitely had an office I had been to before in the basement of a building called the Embassy on Capitol Hill, which Steve Bannon lived in. I had never been to any other Breitbart offices, but that particular building was rented, I think, only by Cambridge Analytica. At least our floor was rented
I'm
by
informed that it's the registered office, Suite 1000, the registered office of Freemark Financial Services, and that Breitbart is also registered there. Does that ring any bells?
No, I believe there were only employees of SCL USA representing Cambridge Analytica that were working out of that office. I was there for 9 months, and
did you ever come across a company there called Glittering Steel? film production company?
I believe that was Steve Bannon's production company.
Yeah, were they registered at the same office?
No, I think they worked out of the embassy. Well, they could have been registered there. I have no idea about the registration information.
Okay, thank you. Can I move over? And a couple of colleagues of I think Mr. Fowley, for example, talked about this. Some of the stuff you're doing at the moment. Are you still advising Siglo?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's a blockchain protocol for allowing individuals to monetize their own data and be rewarded in tokens that are traded for airtime. So if you basically, there's an app that takes control of your lock screen and shows you targeted content. You decide what data you want to share with the app, and it'll show you content accordingly. Now, if you decide to watch that content or answer surveys, then you are rewarded in tokens that pay for your phone bill. So about 1.2 million individuals in Mexico and Colombia use that. The app is actually called Piggy, and they put tokens in your piggy bank that you use to pay for your phone bill. There's also families that use that for remittances, so they earn tokens to pay for their family's phone bills.
Why Mexico and Colombia?
My friends who co-founded the company have spent a lot of their life in Mexico. It's one of the reasons why I asked Alexander Knicks over and over for years if I could open up a Mexico City office. I have a lot of friends that live there, and it's actually a lot cheaper to open a technology company there in terms of staffing and office and everything. The technology industry there is also quite underdeveloped compared to the United States, so it's a lot easier to pitch and win contracts, although it takes longer to negotiate them. There's not very much competition in those markets.
But it's registered in Gibraltar. Piggy is pig.gi, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Why is it registered in Gibraltar but it's working in Mexico and Colombia?
Right, because it's a blockchain company, and right now blockchain is not regulated in a straightforward way. So if you register in a location that already has laws that govern the use of digital assets on the blockchain, then you can understand what your legal implications are. But in countries that have not yet legislated on that, where Mexico, the new fintech laws have not yet been approved by the president, you're not sure what judgments are going to be made about your company when there's no laws yet about it.
So you're operating companies in countries B and C, but you're operating under the laws of country A?
Well, there are no laws about the technology that's being used. It's too new. Mexico has no legislation on it at the moment.
Does Cambridge Analytica have a shareholding in Piggy?
No, there was an investment that was made or that was offered, and also back-end work for building out some of the database and infrastructure was offered, and that relationship was severed due to the inability of Cambridge Analytica to handle their data obligations properly, and that company was not interested in growing with a company that could not guarantee them that their users' data would be protected.
Okay. There are presidential elections coming up this year in Colombia. Now, I take it that none of the activities that you've been involved in so far will have a political angle to them? In terms of data sharing or data activity in Colombia?
No. I was in contact with 3 of the presidential campaigns in Colombia, but we never even did a pitch or a meeting, let alone undertaking any work there. I've never even been to Colombia. But yeah, SCL in Cambridge has no business in Colombia whatsoever.
Okay. Moisat? What's that?
It's one of my friends' satellite telecommunications companies in Mexico. More than half of Mexico does not have access to internet at home. In the rural areas, it would cost the government billions of dollars to build out that infrastructure. So this company designed a program where you could use cheap and portable satellite dishes to set up in areas where, for quite a wide radius, you'd be able to triangulate satellite signals and give Wi-Fi access to individuals that had never had it before.
Does it involve harvesting data? Is there a data harvesting aspect to it?
I suppose there could be, but right now there isn't, no. It could be used for that, though, if the software that was used for accessing the wireless had a data collection method. That's the same with any wireless that you use anywhere in the world.
So, with any of these current activities, do you still have a business relationship with Alexander Knicks?
No, I don't.
Okay. When did you last see him?
It's a good question. I
Or
think I last saw him in...
When were you last in contact with him?
I think I last saw him in Davos. Yeah, at the World Economic Forum. Yeah.
Right. Just a couple of final questions, if I may, Chair. There was a hack of data from Uber. I think the
Hack of data from
Uber, the taxi firm.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever come across where that data being used in any way? For example, by some of these some of the political campaigns.
No, although our firm, Cambridge Analytica, had meetings with the CTO of Uber in California maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I don't believe anything came of that, but a conversation was had. Yes.
Okay. And one final question. You referred to having 2 sets of business cards and so on earlier. Who did you work for?
The SCL group, technically, was
in your
my
own
employer.
mind, who did you work for?
When I joined, I only worked for the SCL group because I didn't want to work for the Republicans as a registered Democrat. I later joined Cambridge Analytica mostly to help build out our commercial business out of New York.
And was there ever a time when you were working for both entities?
Of course, at all times. As soon as I joined Cambridge Analytica, I was still working for SCL Group. Cambridge Analytica as an entity didn't employ anybody, so I was always an employee of the SCL Group.
Whose name was on your payslip? I mean, which company's name was on your payslip?
It was SCL Group, and then it turned to SCL USA.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask, Brittany Kaiser, is it the case that one of your colleagues at Wenner Capital also worked at Mauersat and previously shared an address at Cambridge Analytica as well? So is this coincidence, or is there a connection between those organisations?
We all lived together as friends in Mexico.
Okay,
I've known
so
these people for over a decade.
So it's more of a personal connection than
Personal
a
friends,
commercial
yes.
one. Yeah. Okay. I'd just like to go back and ask a couple of questions about the campaign in Nigeria, which was raised earlier on. So you said that the consultants that were hired to work on the project that you didn't know worked for Black Cube or a part of Black Cube.
No, I'd never heard of the company Black Cube until it was brought to my attention in the press.
So what did you know about these people when you hired them, other than you said that they'd had experience of working in elections in Africa? What else did you know about them?
That they had also worked on elections or for governments in Latin America, and that they had previously undertaken government contracts for intelligence gathering as well.
Yeah. And you said that Sam Patton ran that side of the campaign, is that right? That he was
he ran the SCL side of the campaign, and I know that he met with those people in country, the other consultants. I don't know the nature of those meetings, but he was the one that was hired by SCL Group to run that communications campaign. He was an ad hoc consultant for us and just on our global roster. He didn't work for us full time.
So SCL brought Sam Patton in as a consultant to run this campaign.
Yes.
And was it on Sam Patton's recommendation that these other consultants were brought in as well?
No, it was just upon my introduction because I knew that these people existed and that they had worked in Nigeria before. I didn't know anyone else in the world that had ever even worked in Nigeria in political. So I introduced them to the clients, and the clients decided to start an initial engagement. And after they weren't satisfied with what they received from them, they didn't re-engage, from what I understand.
So who introduced you to these consultants?
I was introduced by some friends in Israel.
Okay. So did you believe that these consultants were, you said they'd worked in intelligence before, there's quite a big industry of ex-intelligence officers working in communications.
Yes.
Did you believe they were ex-Mossad agents?
They could have been, yes.
They were Israeli. You knew they were Israeli, the consultants.
I knew they were Israeli and that they had undertaken government intelligence gathering contracts before. They had that in their CV, shall we say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that your grandfather had been an intelligence officer. Was that in Israel, or was that in America, or where was that?
Based in the United States, but he was still in infantry when he worked in Korea and Vietnam, and then he came back to the United States and joined military intelligence.
In the United States?
Yes.
Yeah. So you, these consultants were recommended to you, they were Israelis, therefore a strong chance they've worked in Israeli intelligence. And had you met them before, or had worked on any projects with them before?
I'd never worked with them before, no, but I did meet them when I was in Israel on a trip to Tel Aviv, and that's why I knew who they were.
Yeah. And had they worked with Sam Patton before?
Not that I know of, but I wouldn't be privy to that information. I'd never met Sam before that either.
Yeah.
I met Sam for one day, one meeting where he came to London to get briefed about the project before he went to Nigeria. So I didn't really know either of them very well.
Yeah. Did you take advice about any other consultants you should hire?
We, in general, had a list of other companies that we had worked with, or we could research other companies to suggest where consultants could fill in for products or services that we didn't offer, like
Yeah.
our relationship with AIQ. We couldn't offer our own digital campaigns or our own software development, but AIQ could do that on our behalf.
You said that their role was intelligence gathering. I mean, what do you understand that to entail?
They had given me examples on where individuals or governments had been defrauded, and they were able to trace where money had come from in order to find criminals.
And how would they do that?
I guess they would use different types of data software to trace transfers between bank accounts and follow the money, but I don't really know how that works.
Well, that could be called hacking, though, couldn't it?
If you improperly access data, then yes, people refer to that as hacking.
But it would be difficult to get records about people's financial transactions properly accessing it, because you then need permission of their bank or of the individual themselves.
I do believe that if you're working on behalf of a government, that you can get permissions to do financial tracing through banks, yes, legally.
Yeah, but in this case, they weren't working on behalf of a government. They were working on behalf of a political campaign funded by a mysterious backer.
That's true, but I don't think they did anything financial on the Nigeria campaign.
So you don't believe they were involved in any hacking during the campaign of data and information about financial transactions or emails or anything else?
Well, if you call going into a campaign convincing them you're part of the campaign and then leaving with data hacking, then I suppose so, but I wouldn't call it that.
How do you distinguish between the two?
Hacking usually means remotely that you are breaking into the back end of somebody's data security and getting data in that kind of way. I don't think that's how they obtained the information. I think they did it in person with permission to use the computers.
So they broke in the front end.
They
broke in the front end rather than the back end.
I guess you could say that, yes. From the videos I was showing.
Well, indeed. This does sound that there's, it'd be questionable the legality of what they were doing and whether they were engaged in criminal acts. And does that not concern you?
Yes, it's concerning, and I didn't know about what they were up to until afterwards, until it had already been done. Again, I didn't negotiate a contract with them or for them or send a proposal on their behalf. I just made an introduction.
Your position seems very unusual and somewhat slightly vulnerable in this campaign, because you've hired a group of people that you don't really know, but that have been introduced to you. Mm-hmm. You don't really know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And they could be hacking, they could be committing criminal acts, but you don't really know. And there's also a dissemination of creative material to support the campaign as well, mm-hmm. of which you don't see any during the course of the campaign. Mm-hmm. So, what is your role in this campaign?
My role was to win a contract for the SCL group. I had worked there for maybe 2.5 weeks when this occurred, so it was quite fast-paced. I wasn't really briefed into everything that was going on, all of our products and services. I was told that, my job was to win a contract. So when I was introduced to individuals that were interested in paying money for elections communications, I thought, okay, well, that was pretty quick. I thought it would take me months to find somebody that was interested in that.
But you're then responsible for spending that money as well, aren't you? Because you're hiring people, you're commissioning work, and all the rest of it.
No, we have something called a a senior acting director of the project, which this time we had 2 individuals that are in charge of doling out the money and what that's used for.
And who are they in this case?
So Sam Patton was one of them, the external consultant, and our internal consultant was a woman called Karis Bales.
It's a very weird structure, isn't it? Because you've got Sam Patton, who doesn't work for SEL, but is brought in as a consultant. He sits above you.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's you. You hire in consultants that have been recommended to you. You don't really know, and you're not responsible for what they do. You're not responsible for the creative work produced during the campaign, and you're not responsible for handing out money to the different contractors as well. And you've only been at the company 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like an extraordinary organisational structure, and
It does.
one where actually your position is either very exposed or you're deliberately in a position where you're just being told to hire people and move things around without ever really knowing what's going on. I mean, it would seem to me that a structure like this, if you were engaged in criminal activity, is deliberately designed to limit the liability of SEL in this case, because so much of it is being done through contractors who are working very much at arm's length or in the dark from the people that hired them.
I would say it sounds pretty disorganized, actually, but in this case, it was definitely not intentional. I kind of went full speed ahead into a new position where I was only a consultant, and I had a goal, which was to win these contracts and try to quickly put together the people who could actually achieve any of the services that were being asked for by these potential clients. Now, political campaigns all over the world are like that, because as a contractor to a political campaign, the longest you're ever going to work for somebody is probably a year, usually 6 to 9 months, which is why it was interesting for me to work for the SCL group, because when I had worked on political campaigns before, you look for a new job every 6 to 9 months. And there are periods of time where there is no work to do. So it's very unstable, and it's not something that you can usually do professionally. So the SCL group seemed like a good option, because there would constantly be work all around the world, and hopefully no gaps, as long as I could do my job and find political projects to work on.
Sure. And so with the project like this Nigeria project, where is the work being done? Where are you? Where are they based? How much of this is done remote? Is it all done remotely? How much of it is done in country in terms of your work?
My work, I had meetings with these individuals in London, in Madrid, and in Washington, D.C. Then the contract was signed, and the only other meeting I undertook on behalf of that campaign was seeing those other consultants when I came back to London. There were no other meetings that I engaged with on behalf of that campaign. That was run by the operations team.
Okay, so you're based remotely while this is going on. So you're responsible for putting the team together, but you're not in country. They're then left to get on with the campaign.
Yeah, it was suggested that in case I wanted to go, that I could get a visa for Nigeria to go with the team. But then Alexander said there were so many other opportunities that I could explore that I should spend my time winning a new contract while that campaign was run separately from myself.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want a couple of things I just want to round up on before we close. You mentioned Breitbart in your written testimony, and
yes.
you posed the question about whether Breitbart UK data could have been used in the referendum campaign.
Yes.
Because it was Breitbart data in America was being used as part of the data sets that SCL and Cambridge Analytica used in America. Is that correct?
That's correct. Part of my sales pitch to Republican clients was that we were the sole redistributors of Breitbart's engagement data. So all of the data that they collected as an online media agency. So I just posed the question because I know that there's issues around using media data for political purposes, so it might be interesting for people to explore that.
Yeah, okay. Certainly an interesting point. I think we'd be interested in following up on that. Mm-hmm. You said right at the beginning that you'd done political work in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Are you still engaged in any political work in Mexico?
No, we're not.
And I mean, we're going back to what we discussed earlier about the data collected through Piggy. I mean, presumably that could be used in political campaigns as
It
well.
could have been, but it never was.
But it could be in the future. Would there be a restriction on that?
I don't think that users have opted in for their data to be used for those political purposes. They would need to sign new terms and conditions upon using the app.
But that was still okay. But that would still apply. Who is your? Could you just confirm for the record as well? You mentioned that there's a sort of former housemate friend of yours who was involved with Bueno Capital and Mawisat and had been at Cambridge Analytica. Who was that?
There was no one that was also at Cambridge Analytica, but Vladko Gigov was part of Moisat and Bueno Capital, and also Chase Ergin, both.
Okay, so that's.
But none of them were ever employed by Cambridge Analytica. No.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So, but that was the person you were referring to.
Yeah. But they're my co-founders of Bueno Capital, and they both worked for Moisat. Yes.
I mean, you've alleged in your testimony today that you believe, going back to the referendum campaign, that Leave.eu as an organisation, Arron Banks as well, may have broken data protection law. Is that your concern? Because of on two grounds, by the processing of data outside of the UK, and also by the merging of consumer data with political data to form the data set for the referendum.
Or political data from the party with political data from the campaign.
Yeah.
If individuals had not opted in to that being a use case of their data, then I don't believe that those data sets could have been matched and modeled in that way, or at least not used for communications purposes of a political nature.
When did you personally become aware that working in that way would be illegal?
It would be illegal if the proper opt-in was not undertaken. So with a lot of our clients, if they wanted to use certain data sets, we ran opt-in campaigns. Yeah. So it was very possible to make these data sets usable for matching and modeling. That's something that can easily be done with a little bit of money.
Was that part of your recommendation?
Well, it would have been, yeah, of course. This has no full strategy. This is an initial document because we had not been paid for the first proposal I had done, so I didn't want to put too much energy into exploring this if Arron Banks was not planning on signing a contract or paying for even phase one.
But is this discussed in the legal opinion that you supplied the committee with?
No, because the legal opinion was actually only for the UK Independence Party data, so we would have had to have a new legal opinion before undertaking this piece of work. But
some of the same principles would apply. I just wondered about how upfront people were in. You've made quite a serious allegation. I'm sure that be of interest not only to our committee but to the Information Commissioner and the Electoral Commission as well. Yep. And what I'm interested in, to what extent did people know at the time that they were walking into a legal minefield and that a lot of this data might not be usable without consent? Or whether, as you suggest in your written submission, Arron Banks thought it was all his data and therefore he could do with it what he wanted.
Yeah, I wasn't fully aware of all of the different implications of this at the time, where I probably would have said something about the fact that everybody in the call center had told me that they were using the data of clients or prospects of Eldon Insurance. So I wasn't completely aware of ownership and opt-in. Obviously, the longer I spent with Cambridge Analytica and the more allegations came out about the company in the press, I became very well briefed into what these laws look like.
Sure, but were you concerned? But as part of you presenting your strategy and doing the work that you've done, and I think you've been quite clear, as far as you're concerned, you were working on the campaign, but just not being paid for it. I think you're pretty clear on that. But as part of that, did you have discussions with them where you said, using the data in this way, this strategy is contingent on you having the consents you need in order to use the data in this way, otherwise you're breaking the law?
Yes, so in more than one of these proposals, in the different points that I lay out, you can look through them in your own time, it says that the undertaking the work or taking receipt of any data sets was contingent upon having a specific legal opinion drawn out about the work proposed in the document.
Sure. So your view would be is if they didn't do that, then that's their call, but they were warned that they should.
Well, not only were they warned, but in the opinion by Philip Koppel QC, there were quite a few pieces of advice in there that said that something like this would have at least had to have been undertaken in the United Kingdom only, and no data moved to another country at minimum. And then also opt-in structures and the Data Protection Act were mentioned as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Paul Farrell.
Because Christopher Wiley made his position quite clear. Ms. Kaiser, do you hold any personal opinions on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for the UK to leave the European Union?
No, I don't. I'm not a voter here. I do believe in a lot of the democratic structures that have been set up by the European Union. I believe in their human rights decisions and their upholding of individual rights and freedoms. So I do think that the UK support of that is critical to the European Union continuing to uphold that in other countries. But I also have lived and worked all over the world, and I understand that leaving Malaysia was the best thing that ever happened to Singapore. So I can see it on both sides.
I'm just curious because of your impetus to get involved in politics with Obama and the company that you kept at Cambridge Analytica for 3 years. Thank you.
Chris Matheson.
Quicker, Ms. Kaiser. Sophie Schmidt worked for Cambridge Analytica at one point, did she not?
Yes, I believe she did an internship in 2010.
That was before you got there.
Yes, many years
course,
before I got
yeah.
there, yes.
And obviously she has strong connections to both, to Uber and to Google. Well, when you were there, did you have any other contacts with some of these big data companies, such as Google or Uber?
Not Uber, although, as I said, I was informed about that meeting happening in California a couple of years ago with their CTO. But with Microsoft, Google, and a few other companies of that nature, and Facebook, they had 2 different political teams in the United States. So they had their Republican team and their Democrat team, who usually inhabited separate offices on separate floors. And so with the Republican team, my consultants in Washington, D.C. would work with them closely on how we would use their tools to the best benefit for our clients.
Right, but it wasn't necessarily, it was a business relationship rather than a nexus of people at the top of the tech sector.
Yes, it had nothing to do with executives or key decision makers. It was a service that those technology companies provide to clients, and Cambridge Analytica was a client because we were making purchases of digital advertising space through them.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Last couple of questions. Just going back to Sam Patton. He worked on. You said he was someone who SCL brought in to work on election campaigns, work on campaigns. Can you say? Can you name any other campaigns where he worked? Do you know who he worked?
He was brought in to work on Mexico, but in the end, that campaign wasn't signed off or paid for, so he came back. I don't believe he undertook much work there at all.
And what about in America?
In America, yes. I'm trying to remember what he did for us in D.C. Maybe he was consulting to the Senator Cruz's campaign. I remember him. I was copied into something where he was organizing an event or a protest on Capitol Hill. I don't remember what that was for. I think it was in opposition to sanctions being dropped against Iran. Because Senator Cruz and Donald Trump did a joint event on the Hill. I don't know if that was the same event that Sam was consulting to. I'll have to look that up for you.
But you think that could have been?
Possibly, yes.
And what about some of the, given he worked in Mexico, did he work on some of the Caribbean elections as well?
Again, that's possible. I knew that Sam was a trusted senior consultant to the company when I joined in 2014, which is why it was suggested that he was somebody that I should work with and consider, giving a job to and having go and work on the Nigeria campaign.
Did he work with SCL in Trinidad?
Possibly, but I think the Trinidad campaign happened before I even worked in the company.
And St. Kitts, you were involved in the St. Kitts campaign?
I wasn't.
Okay.
No.
And you're not aware whether you worked on that?
St. Kitts, there were... Actually, Alexander, I think, was the campaign manager himself at the time.
Okay.
Just because the company was very small and didn't have very many consultants. He spent a lot of time there as an individual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Final question from Julia Knight.
Yeah, sorry, Chad. I've been coming in and out of this session, but I have to say,
no problem.
I think the way you've handled the question was very impressive, actually. So, I just wanted to get your perspective as well, just in terms of what do you actually think the legislators should do in order to better protect people's data and to empower consumers? Obviously you've sort of been on the sharp end of this. What do you think in terms of what should actually happen?
Well, I'm very glad that you asked that. That's been the main thing that I've been spending my time on since it's become obvious that even the current legislation is not sufficient to protecting individuals' data. So right now, even in the European Union, where your personal data can be seen as property, there is not a transparent structure for you to understand what data is being collected about you, where it exists, and what these data sets look like and who they're shared with, or for what purposes those data are used. Number one, so absolutely no permission-based structure to that whatsoever. There is not a very easy way to understand the portability of your data either at the moment. So the right to delete, you can spend a lot of money with lawyers and get Google to delete some things that could be defamatory, but that is very difficult, and you would have to have a lot of money to undertake a process like that. So portability of data, I think, is incredibly important. And then the ability to monetize your own data for yourself. So think about it right now. Most of the largest companies in the world, Google at $700 billion, Facebook at, I think it's now at $400 billion after their engagements with Cambridge and others. It used to be 500 billion, but then there's Amazon and there's Alphabet and Apple. All of these companies are the 5 most powerful companies in the world with trillions and trillions of dollars. The sole worth of their companies is the fact that they own and possess and hold and use the personal data of people from all around the world. That is what their power is. Those are their assets. Their assets are other people's digital assets. So I personally believe, and I'm backed up by a lot of my co-founders at a lobbying organization I started called the Digital Asset Trade Association, DATA, which we founded in January. We're specifically campaigning for new legislation on how people can have rights and access to their own digital assets and how those are governed. So I think that the best way to move forward are for people to have for people to really possess their data like their property. So if you think about it, like Airbnb has allowed you to monetize your own property, but before somebody comes to stay in your house, you know what your property is going to be used for, what their intentions are for it. You agree a price, and that's paid before you hand away the keys. Why can't our data assets be the same? Not only would that allow individuals to decide if they wanted to or not share their data for different purposes. So you might want to monetize it for advertising, or you might want to allow politicians access to your data to understand more about their issues and see the campaign communications materials, or you might want to monetize your medical data for cancer research. You could be given all of these decisions and decide whether or not you wanted to engage in that. And also, the world could be provided with a universal basic income. Not a lot of money, but if you think about the trillions of dollars that are now possessed by technology giants and by governments, if some of that was redistributed amongst individuals as compensation for the use of their property, I think we'd really be taking steps in the right direction.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are you still in touch with Alexander Nix?
No, I'm not, but it's unfortunate because he actually was a friend of mine and a mentor to me for many years. So I hope he's learned a lot through this and eventually finds a way to make amends for what's happened.
Do you've seen from some of the evidence we published from Emma Bryant yesterday as well, it touches on his relationship with WikiLeaks, or whether he had a relationship with WikiLeaks, and whether he had a direct relationship with Julian Assange or just through intermediaries. Do you have any sense on that at all?
Oh, I found out from the press that he had reached out to, I guess, a random email that he had found on their website to ask if he could disseminate the materials that they had on Hillary Clinton, which I found rather shocking. It's a weird cold email to send.
Well, he said through, I think when he gave evidence to the committee, he said it was via a kind of speaker bureau where he knew...
someone that takes speaking inquiries for the WikiLeaks organization.
But Nigel Oates, in his evidence to, what Emma Bryant has given us as evidence in terms of the interviews she had with him, he says that Nix just called Assange up and asked whether they could help disseminate information through some of the information relating to Hillary Clinton that WikiLeaks had, and which suggests a slightly more direct route of contact. I don't know whether Julian Assange. I don't know how you phoned Julian Assange, but
I was going to say I don't think it's possible.
I know how you emailed him
phone.
because he's emailed us, but through his intermediaries. But I don't know how easy that is. But I mean but just suggests a more direct relationship than the slightly more round the houses one that was described by Mr. Nix himself.
Well, from what I understand, he made this cold approach through an email, and that he received a response that there was no interest. I don't think you can call up Julian Assange. So that was probably misleading in the evidence.
Shout out to him maybe, but
Yeah.
and have you had? I mean, you had in your working career, have you had much engagement with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange at all through his representatives, or is that form part of your work at any time?
Yes, so I have undertaken quite a few degrees and theses and research in human rights. So when the Iraq War files were first released, I taught myself how to use an FTP client so I could read those documents and use them as primary resource material. So a lot of my theses in the past have in my biography WikiLeaks documents as documentary evidence of the crimes against humanity that I was researching on.
Sure.
Yes.
And as part of your academic research, did you try and reach out to WikiLeaks directly to talk to people about their work?
Yes, we had some mutual friends. I believe John Jones QC has been talked about in the press, and my relationship with him. He was one of the WikiLeaks legal team.
How would don't want to sort of it should not if it's a private matter, but what was the nature of your relationship with John Jones?
I was a consultant to Dowdy Street International, which is a chambers that I respect very much.
Just as well.
And he was starting a new section of Dowdy Street in The Hague. So I had gone there to interview for a position, and he wanted to take me on. I'm not a qualified barrister, although I had intended to undertake those qualifications. So he had a private consultancy called Day Jones, which he said he could employ me through so that I could help him with research, casework, campaigning. Yeah. And I brought a few human rights cases of individuals that were prisoners of conscience in jails around the world to see if him and the team at Dowdy Street could help these people.
So was Alexander Nix aware of this work when he hired you?
Yes. Yeah, he had met John. Oh, I introduced him to John Jones, yes.
Yeah. So I just wondered if Alexander Nix wanted to reach out to Julian Assange, wouldn't he just do it? Couldn't he do it through you? That's
why I was wondering why I found that out from the press, because he could have asked me to put him in touch with the legal team.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Well, it was interesting. He not says that. He said they had no way of knowing how they could get in touch with Julian Assange. But actually, he knew that you knew, and you worked for him, and he knew that when he hired you.
Yeah. So that's why I was confused again. Why I found that out from the press. But maybe he just didn't want people to know that he was making those types of approaches, which I suppose would be intelligent.
You can understand.
Yeah.
I think that concludes the questions from us today. Thank you very much. We understand what it takes to go through this process, and you've put together a lot of information that is hugely helpful to the committee's work, and been able to talk at great length and in great detail about that, and we're very grateful for that. Just before we close the session, I just have to make a short announcement about Alexander Nix. Alexander Nix was due to give evidence to the committee tomorrow. His legal representation has said that he's now not able to give evidence to the committee tomorrow as a consequence of him having been served with an information notice and being subject to a criminal investigation by the Information Commissioner's Office. We've taken advice as a committee from the parliamentary authorities on this matter. He's not been charged with any offence. The sub judice rules do not apply in this case, as there is no ongoing legal proceeding. And we'll be discussing this with the Information Commissioner on Thursday. But it's certainly the intention of the committee to take this further and to consider issuing a summons for Mr Nix to appear on a named day at some point in the near future. And I hope we'll be able to update people about that early next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Portcullis